This is Kimberly Quinn, host of the Mindcraft podcast, and I can't tell you how much fun I have had doing this podcast. I started when the world closed over the pandemic in an attempt to spread some positivity out there and give people some strategies to enhance their own well-being and reduce anxiety and all of that. Now, 2 years later, we're still going strong and now listened to by 52 countries across the world. And I've even helped some of my students get going with their own podcasts. It's super easy to do. And I'll tell you, if you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it is the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. I'll just explain for you. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It is a ball. Start today. Greetings, Minecrafters, and welcome to another hopefully engaging Minecraft discussion on what I'm thinking about today. The topic is, being afraid of being afraid, or, fear scares me, the fear of fear. And we think about, of course, that when we think about that famous quote by Roosevelt, the only thing to fear is fear itself. I mean, I think most of us, if you've, I think many of us can really understand that on a visceral level. When we actually feel afraid, we feel afraid. And I don't know that there's a worse feeling in the world other than I would equate the most excruciating emotion a human being can feel is shame. And both of those two, fear and shame, are just the worst. And so much of the time we get wrapped up in fear. We get seduced into being afraid, take it on, internalize it, feel it all over our bodies from head to toe. And then often what we fear most doesn't even happen. And I'd like to also do a shout out to Shetty. As some of you know him, he's one of my new I've added him to my list of great teachers up there with Oprah and Wayne Dyer. And I've listened to Aaron Doughty recently, but I listen to Aaron Doughty on occasion. And there's a bunch of them. Joe Dispenza I've listened to a little bit. But anyway, Shetty has got it going on. And I was reading his book. I'm at the end of it, actually, Thinking Like a Monk. And I am en route to developing a monk mindset. I love that. So anyway, he talks about how we have a tendency to let our fear drive us. And this is just so true. And he also talks about how fear itself is not a real problem. It's that we sort of are fearing the wrong things. And what we should sort of really be fearing is what fear has to offer. And chiming in here that in some ways, this is sort of analogous to how, and I've done some videos and also some Psychology Today articles on this too, with the way we view stress, because we can turn how we think about stress around too. We can turn in a similar fashion. We can turn the way we think about fear around too, and not to make it something that it isn't, more to embrace it. Kind of like we've made the analogy before about, how powerful, a large horse is, and yet like a train, like these little jockeys are running around these tracks, weighing not even 100 pounds often, and that little tiny jockey is controlling this powerful animal that's running at ridiculous velocities with a simple tug on the reins. And so think about that with fear being this powerful thing that has the potential to just get out of control, throw us, leave us in the dust, like in a horse race, badly damage us, right? Leave us injured. Yet really, we can control it. It's when we allow it to get out of control that there's a problem. And Jay talks about, developing this awareness. And you know that I'm big on awareness. Without awareness, we can't do it. Really, I mean, our hands are sort of tied, right? Because we can't do what we do know. We cannot do what we do not know. So once it gets on our radar, once we can see it, visualize it, feel it, whatever the senses we're talking about are, it's only then that we can actually get a grip on whatever it is, take the reins, and then get ourselves back on track, so to speak, and in control. And that fear can actually act as a sort of a warning beacon, and actually can guide us to get to know ourselves on a deeper level, and also what we value. And it can actually lead us, it can actually sort of serve as a vehicle or a tool to help us sort of tune in to our own sense of purpose, our greater meaning. And for lack of a better way to say it, we're talking about dharma is like our passion, our what we're put on this earth to do, and how we become fulfilled in this life. And fear can actually point us in the right direction when we harness it. And so Jay Shetty puts it like this. He says, we can use fear to get to the best of us. And sort of Jay kind of like invites us to understand that we can waste so much time and energy trying to remain comfortable in our comfy bubble, comfy zone, as we say, right? And often fearing stress, often fearing the challenges and obstacles of life, often fearing change, when these things, the change, I think of it as wind, right? Wind can switch direction any given minute. It can get stronger, it can get lighter, it can let us know that a storm is coming, it can make the trees dance. I think of it like that. And the thing is, when we want to stay comfortable and resist being uncomfortable, this is going to have us in a very stagnant place. When I think of stagnant, I think of a pond. We have lots of ponds up here, although mostly in northern Vermont, they're very clear and nice to jump in. Although most of us who live here can certainly relate to jumping into a pond where the water is not moving swiftly underneath, and that pond is going to be stagnant. It's going to smell. That's how you really know, honestly. Clear ponds don't smell. Stagnant ponds have a kind of just this swampy smell to them. So they also tend to be the home of leeches and the yuckies. I'm just not a huge fan of snakes. I know they have a place in the ecosystem, but I'm not a fan. And so leads us to stagnancy because we're not moving. A clear pond up here, a clear brook has that movement where leeches can't hang on. They just can't do it because they have to be where it's stagnant, and there just isn't any growth there. Is the whole point. Versus a beautiful clear brook is going to be, sort of invite, you know fish, certainly swimming and all that good stuff. Movement is good. So again, changing our relationship with fear is really important, I think. And as mentioned just a few minutes ago about changing our relationship with stress, with stress, I've done a slew of different episodes on this and different articles. When we this is just part of it. When we change even our words, instead of oh my gosh, like we're doing all this, oh my godding, well, I got this big presentation, my boss is going to be there, if it's my professor, and my team isn't the best, and I've got slackers, and I've had to do it all myself, and what if I get an F, and what if I lose my words when it happens, or if it's in the professional world, my boss, and they're inviting somebody else from the satellite company, and it's all these powers that be, and they're going to see me, and what if I stutter, and what if this, and what if that, and what if my PowerPoint doesn't work, what if the power goes out, what if the whole world's power goes out, blah blah blah. When we change all that what ifing and oh my godding and all the pressure of the boss and her opinion, and then the board of trustees is there and all the rest of it, when we change that to not I need to, I have to, whatever, to I'm excited to do this presentation. I am so excited. I've worked hard on it. The CEO and all these power people may be here, and you know what? This is my chance to shine. I'm not saying I won't be a little nervous, but I am excited. Well, similar but different to change our relationship with fear. We can change it, but it doesn't mean that it entirely goes away. No, it doesn't. It's about sort of acknowledging it and walking through it, which is basically the definition of courage, right? Or part of it anyway. When we look at the possibility that fear could be a guide, saying, whoop, not going in the right direction, or whoop, this thing over here is better. You're so stuck in your comfy zone with this job, and maybe you're not miserable. Maybe you have some friends, and maybe you don't know what huge phenomenal opportunity is waiting just on the other side of the fence. But since you're afraid to look over the fence, you're not going to have the opportunity, kind of thing. When we stay stuck with content, it's okay. We're not miserable maybe, but no growth, no spark. And so that was just like an example with, a job situation. But when we realize that we've been conditioned that stress and fear are the high majority of the time negative, we're going to resist it and go, move away from it. Whereas things tend to, in general, become less scary once we know. It's usually the uncertainty. Even with, if any of you have ever had medical stuff happening, I remember, I had a couple of years ago, a couple of medical procedures done that involved biopsies, and it was a potential bad thing. Thankfully, it worked out well, and it was fine, and what the bad stuff wasn't there. But the fear, I had to wait 10 days. This is like 20 years ago. I had to wait 10 days to hear. And let me tell you about fear. I mean, every thought runs through your head. And I did my very best to curtail it, distract, stop, go in the woods, all that stuff. It's really hard. When we realize, though, that we can embrace this, we don't have to lose all of our valuable life minutes going down the fear rabbit hole, that we do have an element of control there. Okay, I'm back. Giovanni was just ready to let me know that the painter was here. So, and this can be obviously very difficult in some situations, like the one I just shared with you. And still, that said, again, we're not striving for perfection. That's a very, very bad word. We can strive for progress. So it's something that scary, we can salvage some life minutes because we can't control the outcome anyway. Worrying about it helps no one, us or anyone else. And there goes Giovanni. He's going to bark. Hang on one second. When we become aware of the limbic system, how fear works, how the threat circuit works, and how the fight, flight, freeze, whole thing happens when we feel threatened and we are uncertain, this helps. It's the not knowing part that's hard. And so to embrace that, what we're really trying to alleviate is the actual visceral response. This knowledge can be enormously helpful with minimizing what we're actually feeling, which then can help to neutralize the fear. So Jay sort of labels the limbic system's response to fear, the threat circuit, is fight, flight, freeze, and he adds burying it too. And this was some of what I was doing when I was telling you about the biopsy that was years ago that ended up thankfully fine. But to change our relationship, with this, and to not distract ourselves with those four things: fight, flight, freeze, or burying it, but actually to acknowledge that the fear is there and lean into it in a sense that we're just acknowledging its presence. We're not saying, immerse in the visceral tightness and make that worse. No, we're just acknowledging, I'm afraid. Just say, I'm afraid. It seems that I'm afraid today. Just like we do with mindfulness. We don't judge it. Here comes the fear thoughts. It's apparently I'm afraid today. Welcome to the human race. I am afraid. And the fear is much more apt to dissipate when we acknowledge that it's knocking at the door. And Jay says it like this. He says, to close the gap with our fear, we must acknowledge its presence. As my teacher told us, you've got to recognize your pain. You were still seated, and he told us to take a deep breath. Sorry, we were still seated, and he told us to take a deep breath and silently say, I see you, to our pain. That was our first acknowledgement of our relationship with fear, to breathe in and repeat, I see you, my pain. I see you, my fear. And as we breathed out, we said, I see you, and I am here for you. I see you, and I am here for you, with you and for you. Pain makes us pay attention. Boy, that's for sure. Or it should. When we say, I see you, we are giving it the attention it is asking for, just like a crying baby to be heard and held. And then he gets into the breath, which is, of course, amazing because, just like similar to the work that John Kabat-Zinn has done with his pain clinic in Boston at the hospital there, he's done so much with so many people suffering from chronic pain. And when they learned, did the mindfulness training, mindfulness-based stress reduction, hundreds of thousands of people have been able to learn to live with their pain by learning the mindfulness techniques, which involve breathing. So Jay continues, he says, breathing steadily while we acknowledged our fear helped us calm our mental and physical responses in its presence. Walk towards your fear, become familiar with it. In this way, we bring ourselves into full presence with fear. When you wake up to that smoke alarm going off, you would acknowledge what is happening in the moment, and then you would get out of the house. Later in a calmer state, you would reflect on how the fire started or where it came from. You would call the insurance company. You would take control of the narrative. This is recognizing and staying in present time with fear. And then sort of Jay takes it another level when he says to find your fear patterns. This is so important for those of you on the authentic path and just, healing from whatever. It doesn't have to have a label. Like, I had addiction in my family, narcissism in my family and stuff. You don't have to have a label. You might just be recovering from whatever happened during childhood or in your adulthood. And that's all okay. And find what listen to your feelings, because remember that feelings are the language, well, really of the limbic system, but and also feelings are the language of the body. Feelings are the language of the body. Thoughts are thoughts are the language of the mind. So listen to where that visceral fear is coming from, the feeling, which will bring you, excuse me, back to your thoughts. And I know for me, it took me a while to really figure out my own fear pattern. And I knew I think even as a I don't know if I had the words for it, but I think even I knew as a teenager that I had abandonment issues, because if you know the backstory. And then I was kind of aware of that. And then definitely, even in my young adulthood, I became even more aware of that and did some retreats, some self awareness stuff, and became aware of that pretty early. And it wasn't until later in my adulthood that I realized, and then reading Jay's book had me kind of return to that place, that I thought that was sort of it. That was like the bottom, no more digging necessary. And I had this like aha moment, enlightening moment, realizing like, no, there's a deeper dive with where my fear was coming from. And it wasn't just abandonment because my parents didn't want me. It was deeper. It was this sort of and rejection's a close cousin to abandonment too, of course, but it had like a little bit more of a message. So I didn't have a fear of rejection of like I know about making, cuts with sports teams or getting jobs or not getting into this school, that school. That was never it. I always tried my best and the cards fell how they got this job, got into that school, made the sports teams and whatever. That isn't it. It was socially. I would be afraid of um the message of "we don't want you" kind of thing from a group. And it doesn't have to happen for it to kick in. You just can walk around and be at orientation in college or be moving, to Boston and going to graduate school. I went to Boston College for graduate school, and it all worked out fine. I had lovely friendships, wonderful groups. It just sat there like as a slow burn, and it was because my family of origin didn't want me, with my mother actually saying that to me, right? She's told me she wished I'd never been born. So um and I'm fine now. I'm absolutely fine. I'm just sharing that with you to hopefully um be a vehicle of change and you know, and aha moments for any of you out there. And when you look for and find your own fear patterns, maybe this will help you if that fits into your own story, your own scenario. And so that was much later in life that I realized it was deeper than abandonment. It was this fear of rejection. And then the thing is, once you figure out your fear pattern, there's power in that. So it can feel vulnerable, and you have to kind of allow yourself to be vulnerable to get there. But then the good news of that is it flips into a superpower, because once you have the awareness of what your kryptonite is, you've got the power. You've got the power, and you can kind of dodge situations where you just know that wouldn't be enjoyable for you. You can kind of take the reins, harness that horse like we're talking about, be that little jockey on the horse, and go flying around that track and win. Okay, so then understanding your fear pattern, which is basically figuring out what your kryptonite is, though it can be painful in that minute. Wow, once you become aware of that and harness it, just like we're talking about with the horse running around the track, the world is your oyster, because you can by harnessing it, You know what situations to avoid, not avoid in a bad way. You're choosing it. That gives you agency. And even if you somehow landed in a situation with your friend took you someplace, you end up someplace else, and who knew? You just know how to get out of there. It becomes a superpower. So knowing what your Achilles is or your kryptonite, it's kind of like you become that little jockey on this huge thoroughbred horse that's so powerful. And you've got the reins. Your little tiny jockey self is on top of this huge thoroughbred. You've got the reins. All the control is in your little fingers. And you are just flying around that track at full tilt with life by the ass, and you are in it to win it. Because here's the thing, when you know what your kryptonite is, you don't have to be attached to the outcomes. You don't have to carry that visceral fear and all that uncertainty and oh my god and what if this, because you've got that self-awareness of what it is that trips your cord. So it gives you such a gigantic sense of control, and you can let go of the outcome because you don't care. And that means you have greatly reduced your suffering. And that has you flying around with a big old S on your chest and a cape.